I am George Nguyen, Director of SEO Editorial here at Wix, and I help run the SEO Learning Hub with my colleague Crystal Carter. We're here with Mike King. I'm going to do all these intros. You're going to know who everyone is, and then we'll get straight into it. Okay, so a little bit of the ground rules here. I'm going to lean in. Yes, this will be recorded. The URL that you are currently viewing this on is where it will be right after it's done. So if you want to watch it, you're on your lunch break or something, you got to come back to it later. Just bookmark this very URL. It'll also be sent to you. The URL will be sent to you in case you forget to later on. You can ask questions in the chat. And when you're asking questions, make sure to be as specific as possible. Don't use ambiguous words, because when I read your question, it may not be the same time as when Crystal and Mike are talking about that thing. And so if I don't understand the question, we have to move it along. So please be as detailed as possible, and we will try to get to them towards the end of the chat. What else is there? Yes. Check out our monthly webinars every single month. Wix.com/SEO/learn/webinars. Next month is accessibility month, but here we're talking about conversational search. And that's what we're gonna be doing this month. Q&A, yeah, we already went over that. Cool. I'm gonna introduce Crystal first. Crystal, you wanna say hi?
Hi, I'm Crystal. I'm the head of SEO communications here at Wix Studio, and I get to work alongside George talking about SEO and all sorts of other fun things.
Yeah, I feel like if you've attended one of these, then you know Crystal and myself. You may be familiar with Mike King. I'm going to do the Mike King introduction. Crystal's going to bring up this slide. I'm not going to read any of it because you can go ahead and read that. I'm going to tell you what I know about Mike. I've known Mike for maybe 4 or 5 years from my last job, and he's always been relevant in the space for as long as I can remember. He is the CEO and founder of iPullRank. And lately, from my perspective, like very subjectively, but I think a lot of people agree with me, Mike's kind of been on fire. He helped break the algo leak, the Google algo leak last year with Rand Fishkin. And ever since then, he's been on a tear about how we use generative AI in search and what opportunities are there for us. And he's also organizing SEOWeek later this month. You want to tell him a little bit about that, Mike?
Sure. It's the greatest SEO conference that ever happened in the history of life. It's going to be here in New York City. It's literally like, the Monday through the Thursday. And if you want to do some things on Friday, that's cool. But we've got 40 speakers who are really going to tell you like what you need to do to capitalize on the future of search as everything becomes very intertwined with, generative AI. And so a lot of that is what I'm talking about today. But all those other experts have more nuances to tell you about it, so you can really, figure out what to do.
One of those experts is our very own Crystal Carter. You're talking about DeepSeek, right?
Yeah, I'm getting into DeepSeek, deep dive into DeepSeek and deep research. And also one of the reasons why I love speaking is that I just get a front row seat at like some of the best events, and I'm super excited about this one. If you want to geek out on SEO, RAG, LLMs, and all of that, all GPTs, all of the things, all of those acronyms, like honestly, like do go and check it out. I'm super excited.
Awesome. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to hand this off to Mike, who's going to walk us through. Please remember to leave your questions in the chat. And you won't hear from me for a little bit, but Crystal will stay on to help Mike throughout all of this.
And George will be in the chat answering your questions. So we'll see you shortly. Hand over to Mike.
Cool. So yeah, let's talk about SEO for conversational search. And as I was mentioning, SEO Week is actually in 13 days. Crystal will be there speaking, and you can learn more about it at SEOweek.org. We're here in New York City. Okay, so let's talk about the state of the art and science for conversational search. Well, first of all, we're seeing across Google that traffic is going down for all sorts of sites, and it doesn't appear to be coming back. So this right here is a very popular content-driven site, a site that everyone will agree has great content on it. And as you can see from these trends, if we go back to about the May period, when AI overviews rolled out, that's when they started to see the losses of their traffic, right? And so when we look at Wikipedia, because Wikipedia's analytics data is public as well, what I wanted to see here was what happened when ChatGPT first came out? Because everyone was saying like, oh, ChatGPT is going to come out. Google's not going to send as much traffic because, no one's going to be using Google anymore. And that's been a lot of what the media has been trying to tell us for a while. But when you look at that blue line, that's showing when ChatGPT came out, and Wikipedia, their traffic actually increased after that. Whereas that red line is when AI overviews came out in May 2024, and Wikipedia's traffic has been on a downward trend since then. So the whole point here is that AI overviews are going to have a big impact, primarily on informational queries, and Wikipedia is pretty much the king of informational queries as far as ranking like #1 for them. So them being impacted is just a general indication that you should expect the same for your site. However, users are not using Google less. Google came out and said like, hey, we've got 5 trillion searches a year on Google annually. I mean, obviously a year is annually anyway, but they really wanted to highlight the fact that, we are still where people are getting most of their information. And there was some research that came out of Sparktoro and Datos where they showed that actually Google searches grew 20% year over year. So Google is not dying. Like no matter what the media is telling you, no matter how cool ChatGPT seems, it is dwarfed by Google dramatically. However, what we're seeing here is that Google is going in this direction of Googling for you. They've been talking about this for a while, ever since they rolled out AI overviews. They've got a variety of different components that they've been continuing to roll out to make it easier to find what you're looking for. And there's a white paper that was written by a gentleman by the name of Andre Broder, who's been in the search space forever. In fact, if you use the taxonomy that is informational, navigational, and transactional, you're using his work. And so in this paper, he talks about what he calls Delphic costs. And it's really the cognitive load that a user has when they're performing a search. So the first step is they've got to basically convert whatever it is that they're looking for, their information need, as it's called in information retrieval, into Orwellian newspeak, like a query effectively. And then they've got to review 10 blue links and all these other components that are on the SERP, search engine results page. And they have to figure out, what do I actually need from all this information? And then they may like click through 2 or 3 results, and then they have to like make sense of that. And then they may do other subsequent searches because that query wasn't getting them exactly what they wanted for your information need. And so Google is like, we need to cut down on this because that's not a good experience. And so more and more features that they roll out are in alignment with this. So AI mode, which is their latest experiment, it kind of kills the idea of the 10 blue links entirely because they're giving you a relatively detailed response that is like answering your core question and adding a lot of information around that. And then they're also giving you a few citations in the upper right, but no one ever clicks those, right? Like they're just going to read that block of text, and then they may have follow-up questions and so on, but you may not leave Google unless you're looking to take a specific action. And so there's this other demo that Google rolled out about a year or so ago where they were talking about what's called the bespoke UI. And in this example, in this video, I definitely recommend you check it out. This gentleman was showing like, hey, I want to, put together a birthday party for my daughter. And the interface just aligned with whatever his needs were. It wasn't this like 10 blue link environment. It wasn't a standard environment. It was a complete unique UI for the situation. And so in this case, how do we even get in here? Like that's the primary question that you have to ask when you're looking to figure out like, okay, well, what do I do for the future of SEO? Now, here's a couple of things that I predicted 2 years ago when I was writing about this before it was like the thing that was actually live in the SERPs. So one of the things I predicted is that there was going to be a redistribution of search volume for a number of reasons. One of which is that Google can understand a user's query a lot better than before. So, historically you'd write a query that's probably like up to 5 words, maybe 7 or 10, and the more you would add to it, the less you would feel like Google understood what you were asking for. So typically you're more in those like, short tail or head terms, right? And then, as you go through your search journey, the queries become longer, more specific, because you start to believe like, hey, I think Google has a better understanding of this idea as you learn more about the idea. So this redistribution of search volume is a function of the fact that Google can understand longer queries. So it's going to be less about users putting in keywords like, television or LED television. It's going to be the right television when you have a, apartment with big windows or something like that, because Google can better understand that. And we're already starting to see this happen right now. And so what Sundar Pichai from Google has been saying is like, hey, we're seeing more users searching more and they're getting more satisfaction from their results. So what's ultimately happening on the back of that is they're driving more qualified users to the site because they're being educated by these AI overviews before they actually click through to something. So historically, you would have a broad keyword, you'd look to rank for that. So you'd be the one to educate the user, and then they go back to the SERP, they do another search, and you hope that you are also in those later stages. But what Google is effectively doing is making it so the user doesn't have to go to you for that initial information. And so they stay in Google and they perform those subsequent searches. And what we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks is that Google will also link to other searches within those AI overviews, again, keeping users in that ecosystem. So I got some data from SimilarWeb. One of the things that they showcase is that, the amount of usage in Google, so like the amount of pages that users are looking at in Google has gone up since the AI overview launch. So that's in this area right about here. So it's starting to come back down when you're seeing right here. But generally speaking, there's been a lot more pages that users look at as a result of this. And so this is part of what happened to HubSpot. HubSpot was, this famous story as of late that people are saying like, hey, their traffic has dropped dramatically. Well, if you notice, it isn't just these algorithm updates that are being highlighted. It's also this area where there's a big drop where these AI overviews launch. But despite that, HubSpot's revenue is still climbing. They're still having the best quarters of their existence. So that's not just because of organic search, but they are heavily reliant on organic search. And they're still getting a lot of conversions despite the fact that they're getting less traffic. We also predicted that there was going to be drops in the CTR curve. So, typically you expect if you're in the number one position, you get the most clicks. But having the AI overviews here is going to cause a drop there. And so from Seer Interactive, they've been doing a lot of great research on what's going on as a result of AI overviews. And in their data, they're showing that, again, the CTR drops dramatically when there's an AIO present. They're also showing in their data that, they're getting more qualified users because you're not seeing this linear relationship between traffic and conversions anymore. So the whole point of this to understand is that your traffic will likely go down as a result of AI overviews, and traffic is perhaps not the best metric to be using to determine the success of your SEO campaigns unless your primary monetization avenue is advertising. So yeah, where did all this conversational search stuff come from? Well, historically, before it became into the mainstream and so on, you thought of these as just these generative QA systems, so chatbots effectively. And this screenshot you're seeing here comes from a presentation from a senior researcher at Google by the name of Mark Najork. And he was showcasing like, yes, we've got two different versions of this at Google. One was called Magi. That was the internal name for AI overviews. And then Bard was the internal name for Gemini. And then, of course, you've got ChatGPT, Bing Chat, Perplexity, You, and so on. And so, like I said, 2 years ago, I was really curious about how this stuff worked because I believe this was going to be the future of where the interface for organic search was going to go. And so what I did, because this was before Google actually released what they call SGE at the time, or Search Generative Experience. And I was just really curious, like, how does this work? Can I replicate it? And so what I did is I built a proof of concept to show how it works. I call it RAGgle. And I call it that because it's based on this concept, which is called Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG. And RAG is basically when you combine a search engine with a large language model. And what happens is, based on the query, it'll pull back the most relevant documents, and then it pulls the most relevant chunks from those documents. So this is a key distinction between, classical or traditional search, in that in traditional search, you're just looking at the entirety of the page and its relevance, and then you're saying, okay, cool. Now let's look at these other factors like links and a variety of other things, and then you rank those based on that. And then you also have what's called re-ranking, where based on signals that you collect, whether that's like user interaction signals, like links and how much time they spend on those pages, you determine whether or not something should be moved up or down based on how users are reacting to it. But in this environment, you're looking for the paragraphs or passages that are most relevant, and then you feed that to the language model to then generate a response. RAG as a concept was actually developed by the Facebook AI research team called FAIR, and Google is a fast follow with a variety of different versions of it that they've created, but the space is dramatically improving very quickly. And so there's something that is being used now called deep research. And that's this idea of what's called RAG across a variety of different documents. And what happens is Google may look at like the top 20 of the core keyword that the user puts in, but then they have this idea that they call query fan out. They're looking at queries across the topic cluster for that core idea, and then they're pulling back documents from there. So in a screenshot, you're seeing that they looked at 62 different websites to develop the answer, and then they're pulling all the most relevant components from it, and then feeding that to the language model to then generate that very robust response. So what AI mode is basically deep research directly in the SERP. And this is where things are going to get very complicated, because you've got to identify what are all the subqueries that Google may be looking at in those cases, and then optimizing across that set of keywords. So it may be a variety of different documents on your site, or maybe a variety of different components or passages within the same page that you've got to optimize for. So RAG is not the only way that this is done. There's also something called cache augmented generation, where effectively you just have all of the information possible living in memory, and it's pulling from there rather than doing that retrieval step where you're going to like vector databases and things like that. So I give you all this stuff about conversational search systems. This applies to everything, whether it's like ChatGPT or Copilot or Perplexity, but we're mostly going to talk about Google because that's going to be your primary use case when it comes to driving traffic. Now, first thing to think about is that Google's architecture has changed a lot. Historically, we've thought of it as just like you've got the content, you've got the crawler, it builds what's called a corpus, so like a giant set of documents, and then you have a corpus server where they can pull those documents for whatever reason. And then they also have what they call a index builder. So the way that they store these pages is kind of like the index of a book. And they've got to figure out like what are the relationships between keywords and different pages, so it's easy to look them up. But with the advent of generative AI and semantic search and so on, they have embedded your documents or created vector embeddings, representations of your documents so that they can do these semantic lookups. And then they also just throw that large language model on top of all this so that they can generate those responses. So the AI overview itself, it's a function of a user putting in a query. They look at the training data first to say like, hey, can we answer this reliably from our training data? If not, then they have to ground it in other information, at which point they're going to go through a series of documents that are within the index, pull back those components, and then send that to the large language model to generate that response. So those components are known as chunks. And you basically want to get the chunks of your pages, excuse me, embedded within the Google environment so they can say, okay, this is the best chunk in our list of documents related to this query. Cool, let's serve this up. And then you will be a citation in that response. So if you were to look at Google's patents, which I don't necessarily think you need to, I do that, I can give it to you. But the whole point here is that they talk through this whole process where they get that query, they get a series of what they call SRDs, so search result documents, break those into pieces, and then feed the most relevant ones to the language model. So your question might be, okay, well, what does this matter for our traffic? To this day, Google search still sends 24 times, or excuse me, still gets 24 times the traffic of a ChatGPT, So it's still the primary show in town that you're going to want to optimize for, especially if you want to drive traffic. Now, the interesting thing here is that generative AI and SEO are governed by the same ideas. And I'm going to go into more detail on that. So search engines operate on what's called the vector space model. And what they're doing is they're creating vector representations of your query and vector representations of documents. And these are effectively coordinates in multi-dimensional space. And so whichever documents are physically closest in space to the query are considered the most relevant. And this is a really important concept to all of this, because typically when we think of relevance, we think of it as this like qualitative idea. Like you read a piece of content and you're like, hey, this is really relevant to what I'm looking for. And you subjectively say, well, this one is more relevant than that one. But relevance is a quantitative idea where you are, just numerically determining this. And so the higher score you get on a relevance measure is going to indicate whether or not you should rank well for something.
Mike, I'm taking this opportunity to jump in. See Cindy Crum in the chat. What's up, Cindy?
Thanks,
okay, so I was reviewing this as you submitted the deck before this webinar, of course, and I'm a content guy. I think about content in terms of words. When I think about relevance, I focus more on the topic because that's my lens. That's where I come from. That's different from what you're suggesting here. So if for all the content first people working here, how would you explain this in a more, I don't want to say dumb way, because I'm not stupid, but like a more content person friendly way, right? Because I feel like the spirit of what you're explaining is very similar to just the spirit of what I do, but as I was trained as a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, it's still how Google is modeling what it is that you do, right? Like, so what you're describing is exactly what you should continue doing, is like doing deep research on a topic, adding a lot of information related to that topic, and the representation that Google has mathematically is them training on the entirety of the internet and knowing what those relationships look like. So there's a lot of different principles behind what's called natural language processing that reflects real world usage of words. So what they're doing is they're just saying like, okay, well, we know how words are used typically across all the books in the world and all the documents on the internet. And so we've modeled that. How well does your content match that model? And that's not me saying like, hey, you got to copy word for word what someone else said. You just have to represent those ideas as well as other people have, even if you use different words. But semantically, this is all calculated using math effectively.
I'm going to highlight this on screen because I think it matches kind of what you're saying, and I like the way they worded it. What do you think? The vector-based method of relating content is just a mathy version of seeing a relationship. I won't say it's just a mathy version, because it means like, there's ranking here, there's money at play. It's not just a mathy thing, but there's
I think that's a great way to word it. And I think the coming slides kind of explain this a bit better as well.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about the idea of vector embeddings, what you're doing is you're taking the words and you're plotting those in multi-dimensional space, which allows you to do a variety of different mathematical operations on them. So you're literally taking these documents, breaking the sentences down, turning those into numbers, and then based on those numbers, two things that are saying the same thing will have similar representations in that multi-dimensional space. So one of the great examples of this idea is that if you take the vector representation of the word king and you subtract the vector representation for the word man, and then you add the vector representation for the word woman, the closest match will be the vector representation for the word queen. So you're able to like do a lot of this sort of mathy stuff on words by doing that. So the way that generative AI works is you're basically taking these same vector representations and then you're predicting what is the next one to come based on the series of ones that you've just seen. So in this example here, if we've got a sentence that starts with the sky is, it does all these predictions, and then it says, okay, well, the best prediction here would be blue as the next word. So where Google comes into play here is that they effectively invented all of this, right? Like they built this idea from what's called word to vec or word to vector, and then that continued to improve until something called the transformer came out, and then Google also improved upon that with something called BERT. And so BERT was where they started to really get a great understanding of how words work, because not only could they understand the relationship of those words, but they could also understand the context of those words. So historically, if you had a sentence that was like, I went to the riverbank, or with a sentence next to it that was like, I went to the bank to get some cash, Google wouldn't have been able to understand the word bank being a different word in those two different sentences, or having different meaning in those two different sentences. Ever since BERT, they've been able to understand the context of those words, and now they can get a better understanding of your content. So this brought about this concept of what's called dense retrieval, where they can score down to the passage level. They can understand what an individual sentence is in the context of a big page and what that sentence actually means, and they can extract it for a question that's being asked. So when you see things like this in Google, where you've typed in a query and it highlights the specific component of the sentence that is most relevant, that's all of this sort of stuff at work. So when you think about like what you need to do for optimizing for these surfaces, it's really about chunking your content really well, because how it goes into a vector database really informs how it's going to come back out based on that relevance score. And there's a variety of different techniques for it, but the way you need to be thinking about is like, how do I make my meaning be kind of punchy and isolated or specific, so it's very easy for Google to be like, yes, this is the exact paragraph that I want. Okay, so let's get real specific about how do we appear in these large language model situations. First, there's 3 different modalities that people are talking about. So there's the training first systems that are really just like, I'm not going to go out to the web or anything to get any updated answers. Whatever's in my training data is going to be the response that I give you. And then you have search first systems, which are like AI overviews, which are more often bypassing their training data and going directly to what's in the index to get responses. And then you've got hybrid systems like Gemini and ChatGPT that can go either way. So another really important thing to understand is that Google kind of shifted from this idea of what's called lexical search, which is really about like, okay, let's count the amount of time these words have been said on this page. And if this one says it more than the others and has more links, then it's the better page, right? But they shifted towards a semantic version of this about 13 years ago. And it's so funny because in the SEO space, we're still kind of doing the lexical thing, where they can understand the meaning of what's being said in pages and then extract content based on that. So Google actually does a hybrid approach to this, where they'll pull documents based on that lexical model and on the semantic model, and then they'll effectively mix those together and then determine the rankings from there. So when I said relevance before, relevance is measured by what's called cosine similarity. And again, it's basically measuring the distance between angles. So if you get a cosine similarity that's close to 1, that means it's really similar or highly relevant. If it's close to 0, that means it's orthogonal or not related. And if it's close to -1, that means it's opposite. So you get measures that are something like 0.78096 or whatever will be like the score you get for cosine similarity. Whole point here is that these are the sorts of measures that are happening in the background of some tools, not enough tools, but some tools that help you to improve the relevance of your content. And I'm glad that Cindy is here, because it's her word, fraggles. It's all about these fragments and handles within the content. So here's an example from the AI overview. I know it doesn't look like this anymore, but when I was doing my research on it, this is what it looked like. And so when you click on these citations, it takes you to exactly the Fraggle that's been used to inform the response. So the way you can get to these, it's a element parameter that's added to the end of the URL for scroll to text, and it tells you the beginning and the ending of where that text is. So you could extract this yourself if you wanted to. And so what I did around this time was extract all of the Fraggles for the BMW i8, and then I did that cosine similarity to figure out that there is a linear relationship between that and appearing in the AI overviews. So the whole point is that you want to have the most relevant passage. And there's a tool out there from Market Brew that allows you to do this without having to have any of the math. It just allows you to put your page in, what your query is, and then it lights up the different sentences so that you can optimize accordingly. But another thing you need to do is also embrace structured data. So structured data, when you think of something like a knowledge graph, it's really good at facts, but it can't generate information, or text rather. Whereas large language models are really good at generating text and videos and images and so on, but not so good at facts. So if you combine the two, you have a higher likelihood of generating content that doesn't have hallucinations. And so schema can be something that can reinforce these semantic relationships within these RAG pipelines as well. So, what I've been recommending to people is that they should revisit schema.org and incorporate things that are relevant to your content that you weren't historically incorporating. Because people have only really used the schemas that Google gives rich results to, but these RAG environments will consider everything that's in the structured data. And in fact, Crystal's own research kind of reinforces this idea. Crystal, you want to say anything on this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not people should use structured data in the age of AI, and whether or not some of these tools like Perplexity are using AI or are using structured data. But as Mike has explained, the search results are form part of the knowledge base and part of the grounding for these LLM systems. Therefore, if you show in a search result, as we see on the left, which are the Google rich results, which are generated because of schema markup, if you show in those, then that will inform how you show in the LLMs. And this was an example that I found that went all the way through, where there was a couple where many of the same resources were shown across LLMs, LLM tools, and a few of them were shown all the way through. And so, yeah, I think schema markup, structured data is still really valuable. I've got some articles on the Wix SEO Learning Hub if you want to get started with that. And then we have some great resources at Wix.
Yeah, and I really love when you publish this, because I was watching that conversation happen, and like I didn't feel like arguing with people that don't know what they're talking about. But then you publish this, and I was like, boom, say less.
Right? Yeah, it's just like, let's just put this to bed. Cool.
So, a lot of people are calling this generative engine optimization, and I think it's largely a function of this white paper that was put together by a series of computer scientists, some of which that came out of the Allen Institute, Princeton, Georgia Tech, and so on. And what they had done is they tried a variety of different tactics to see, could they improve results or the ability of certain content to rank in Perplexity, specifically because they could control the whole environment to do so. And so they tried a lot of the typical SEO work, like, okay, let's do some keyword stuffing, let's use unique words, so on and so forth. What they ultimately found was the most impactful was 1, citing sources, 2, adding statistics, 3, making your content sound more authoritative, and 4, which isn't in this specific list here, is improving the readability of your content as well. And so when I go through the step-by-step for what these optimizations look like, you'll notice that it aligns directly with these 3 things that we're talking about here. Another thing that they do with that white paper is they also share their prompts that they use in ChatGPT to generate these improvements. So I would encourage you to check this out and use these, on your own content when you're thinking about, like, how do I optimize for this? And we have a whole step-by-step on this on the iPullRank blog. Again, we've been ahead on this for a while, so you'll note that this is from the beginning of last year. But definitely encourage you to check that out. Nevertheless, let's get a lot more specific on how a search engine thinks about this sort of stuff. So there's this idea of what are called semantic triples. It's just how content is effectively understood by, search engines and large natural language processing. And effectively, within a sentence, you'll have a subject, an object, and a predicate, and they can use those to extract information. So in this example you're seeing on the screen, you have Bob is interested in the Mona Lisa. It's the same idea of what you're doing in your structured data, where you'll have like, person, and then you have their name, and you have, is related to, or whatever it is. All of that is just represented directly in your text. So even if a page does not have structured data, a search engine can extract the relationships in the content from the text itself. So the first thing you need to be thinking about is structuring your content into clear semantic units. So rather than having like these long paragraphs, you're going to want to have like a heading and then a short paragraph that answers whatever that question is. And the reason why this works is because when we talk about these vector embeddings, it allows them to have more clarity, because the shorter the block that's being vectorized is, the higher relevance it could have to a given query. So it just allows it to be a lot more precise in how they extract that content. So the optimal length around for that is like 50 to 150 words. You want to have a single topic per passage or paragraph. And again, you want to have those headings be very close to it so that it's very clear that this section is about that specific thing. And then you also want to be really explicit in how you use those semantic triples. So like I said, it's subject, predicate, object, right? So rather than saying a sentence like SEO helps businesses get more traffic, you want to say something more precise like SEO, which is the subject, increases, which is the predicate, organic traffic, which is the object. So that just makes it easier for a search engine to extract that information and then plug it into other things. And then you're going to also, incorporate the rich contextual keywords and entities. And if you've already been doing SEO the right way, you would have already been doing that. But rather than having a sentence like AI tools can help with SEO, you want to be very specific. You want to have a sentence that's like AI tools like ChatGPT, Claude, and Google's Gemini can improve SEO workflows, and so on and so forth. So that specificity allows them to better extract that information from your page and then highlight it. And then again, going back to the idea of having very specific statistics and so on, you'll note in this sentence here, we're saying our analysis of 1 million search queries showed that pages optimized using semantic triples achieved a 22% higher retrieval rate, and so on and so forth. So then again, you can extract these components because they're very clearly laid out in the sentence here, rather than Google having to like look for another source and corroborate it. You become one of the higher value sources because you have very specific information in there. And then definitely just avoid ambiguity. So instead of saying something like they improve performance, be very specific. Our SEO strategies improve the average organic search ranking by 15% within 6 months. So again, more clarity, easier for them to retrieve the information. And so here's just a quick example of what this could look like. This is me explaining what semantic triples are. You have a very specific heading with a definition right below it, and just continuing to do this across the entirety of your page. That's all I got. Like I said before, please come join Crystal and I at the greatest SEO conference of the year. Cindy Crum will also be there as well. And yeah, check us out, SEOweek.org.
It's going to be fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of that great stuff. Yes, the video will be available. Megan, you've been very active in the chat, so we will have that. It will be here. I'm going to jump super there into to the Wix stuff. I'm going to whiz through it, but I'll share that later, and then we'll get to your questions. There was a question in the chat, and I'm also going to address that with something I just did while Mike was doing stuff. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, here we are. Mike, I'm just going to hijack the stage for a second so you can have a little break. Okay, so these are things that we have on Wix Studio. So we just recently launched Wix Astro, and yes, thank you to Mike. Tara's saying thanks to Mike. Mike will be back in just a second. I'm just going to whiz through this real quick. So we just launched Wix Astro. Wix Astro is an agentic AI assistant that is in the Wix platform, and it is there to help you with all sorts of things. It can help you monitor your traffic. You can ask it to help you decide on new products. You can ask it to help you with your premium plans, all that sort of good stuff. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is because you can also ask it about semantic search. So today I asked it, I said, can you help me to optimize for semantic triples? Because if you were somebody who was in the comments and felt like your mind was blown with all of this super clever stuff that Mike's been talking about, this is something that can help you with that. So Astro can help you support your semantic search learning and optimization. So I said, I'd like to optimize for semantic triples, and it explained to me what they were. And then it helped me make a draft about my business. So I wrote in a business and I said, can you help me make that? And then I took the step to validate the response. So I said, how is this optimized for semantic triples? And it explained, it's got the subject, it's got the predicate, it's got the object, and it showed a bunch of different ways that it did this. And it went all the way through, which I thought fantastic. Astro is included on the premium plan, and it's literally, I'll show you in just a second, actually. I'm going to break the fourth wall. Oh yeah, I'm going to break the fourth wall. Here we go. Famous last words. Okay, so somebody in the chat said, how does this apply to service-based businesses? So here's my Wix thing. And then there's a little button that says AI reset in the top corner. Over here, it'll say that. And essentially I said to it, I said, can you help me to give semantic triple copy to a roofing repair company? And it said, sure, tell me about your company. I said, we repair roofs in New Mexico. And I said, we can give you a quote in 24 hours. It said, great. It said, how do you want me to optimize it? I said, I want you to optimize it for semantic triples. And it wrote this out. And then it explained to me how it's optimized for semantic triples, and let me know if that's helpful. And yes, it's included in, I believe it's in Wix as well, but it's definitely in Wix Studio. And yeah, no, it is in Wix as well. So it's launched all across that. So that's something that can help you get things there. And then I'll go back to this one. So that's fantastic. Have a go, check it out, ask it questions. The second one I'm going to bring up is Content AI. Content AI is a content tool that's in Wix blog. And I literally took some text about Beyonce, because I always use text about Beyonce, and I put that into a blog, and it wasn't particularly optimized. And I clicked the Content AI button just there at the top here, this one, and I clicked tweak with a prompt, or tweak with prompt. And then I put in the prompt, based on Mike's recommendations, can you help me make this text better optimized for semantic search by breaking down the content into concise paragraphs and sections? This is what he was saying when he was talking about chunking things and talking about breaking things down into sections. And this is what it came out with. It came out with this. It added in headings. It made things into sections. And in this case, I put replace text, and then it replaced the text and formatted it into my blog. And this is the before on this side, and this is the after. Now, before I hit publish, you'll obviously need to go through all of these things and make sure that you're optimizing it, make sure that it's not saying things that aren't true, make sure that it makes sense, and all of that sort of stuff. But this is a great first step for your content. Lastly, but not least, again, Mike mentioned that we're both speaking at SEO Week later on this month in New York. So if you're in the vicinity, do drop by. Cindy Crum will also be there, who's also in the chat. But we also have some great content about semantic search if that's something you want to dive into. And it's been edited by George, so it's fantastic. We've got some resources as well. So there's a tool for helping you to do your semantic research. And I'm going to hand it over to your questions, because I know that everybody wants to jump into that. And I know I was quick, but you'll get this deck as well.
Yes, if you weren't aware, we add the decks to the webinar sign-up page on the Wix SEO Learning Hub. So that's where you'll be able to find it later on this week. Okay. Now is the point where we all take a nice breather. We move into the Q&A. This is the ASMR portion. If you enjoy this portion and everything leading up to it, please do hit that thumbs up button. My boss looks at it, and I like this job. Okay, fantastic. Thank you all for being such a great crowd. I want to start with this I feel like it's a general question, but it's the one that we're all asking. It's the one that brings us here. How do you deal with the inaccuracy? Oh, sorry, not that one. That one we'll get to. This one. Why don't I show up? Tanya Owens wants to know. She has competitors in this industry. She said, I asked, how come I don't show up for my industry when I ask? Like, I should show up. Why not? That's the thing about LLMs. You can ask them, why aren't I there? You can't ask Google why you don't show up on the first page, right? And they told her, you should. what's the deal? And we are very much at this point in LLMs where everything is so young and nascent. You're just kind of like, what do I believe here, Mike? I mean,
so,
keep in mind, we don't work for these companies. Remember?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, it's a function of everything that we're talking about, right? Like, are you in the training data, which means you're mentioned in a ton of places related to whatever it is your question was, and then it's in the training data? Or do you rank well for the term? And also, when you rank well, is that block the most relevant? Like, it's not enough of a direct reflection of what's happening in the real world. It's just a reflection of like the representations of understanding that these systems have. So the best thing to do is like get yourself mentioned more, get the digital PR happening. So, you're in a variety of, you're in more results so that you have a better opportunity to inform what's being shown in these systems.
Crystal, anything to add before I move on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things Mike pointed out was that these systems are entwined. So doing your core SEO optimizations will help. Building relationships will help. Video is also really valuable. So one of the things that people often overlook is that like YouTube and TikTok are also sources for LLMs. So if you're feeling like YouTube or TikTok or whatever is your go-to, then it's worth investing in those things as well. So for instance, if you do something IRL, like you sponsor the Little League team, do a TikTok that's like, here I am sponsoring the Little League team, like go team, that sort of thing. And I think it's really, really useful. So the short videos are great. There's lots of things that you should be doing, but essentially, as with anything in digital marketing, get out there, be active, and you'll see good results.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned mentions, which is different from the SEO mindset, because we're always looking for links, right? And the way that we get those, you produce something very authoritative, very expert. No one can deny it. Everyone knows it's the best thing. They point your links, you get the rankings, you get the money. Not going to happen on LLMs the same way. So Eddie Jackson wants to know, should I do this? Should I produce more in-depth authoritative content as a producer? Should I double down, or should I maybe more look at my PR strategy, get those mentions instead if I want to show up?
So I think there's a lot of value in continuing to do more in-depth authoritative media as a content producer, like he's saying. Not just the written word, though. I think Crystal alluded to something really important here, is that a lot of these systems are what you call multimodal, meaning that they can take different modes of content to inform what the responses are. And I think especially with AI mode and some of these other like deep research things, you're going to see a lot more of them using other media types. And in fact, that's one of the things that Cindy talks about in her talk at SEOWeek, this thing called MUM, which is, multimodal, unified. I can't remember what it stands for. Whole point is that what they can do is effectively translate across content types, translate across different languages and so on, to then generate responses. So if you're in a space where there's like a dearth of video content on the subject, that can be a good opportunity to, get into those results. So definitely recommend doing that, because it's going to be easier for you to get visibility from that sort of content than text content, because anyone can easily generate text content at this point.
Anything else? I thought you playing with the buttons there, Crystal, highlighting what MUM stood for. Anything else to add there on that question, Crystal?
No, I think it's really, I think that's a really comprehensive answer. I was just in the comments, someone was asking about the Wix tool, for instance, if they could use it for their existing content, and I was just saying yes. Sorry.
Think about also the opposite. Like you when you ask questions about whether I should do this, think about the opposite. What if I don't? What if you stop making authoritative content? Can you?
I think that for that, I think like the LLMs rely on language in order to make their assumptions, decide what they're going to do. So they rely on language. So if you don't mention yourself in the content, then they won't mention you because they won't have any reason to mention you. So I think the other thing that's really important to look at is the sources. If you look at the sources that they use, very often if someone's asking about your brand, they will try to reference your brand. If you're not talking about yourself, they'll reference somebody else talking about you. So there's a certain amount of control that's important when you're thinking about your LLM responses and which content you want to make. So the goals are different sometimes. Sometimes it's a question of making sure that you're there so somebody else isn't there, so that you're actually controlling the narrative. And then I think that, I think you have to figure out the ROI, like whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze. If you're not going to get good value out of it generally, then maybe you don't need to spend a lot of time on it. If you are going to get good value out of it because it will be good for your sales team, it will be good for you to have that on your website. Generally, you'll be able to answer questions directly from users, and it adds genuine value. Then yeah, make the content. Like make the content.
Okay, let's take a look at, maybe you are showing up. Great. What if it's not positive?
Or inaccurate?
What then do you do? And this is everyone's going to have this, especially if you work at a major corporation like Wix. Many of you are Wix users. Some of you love us. A lot of websites are going to say that we're not better than other platforms, but the reasoning behind that's not always transparent, right? So especially in the case of AI overviews, what do you do to get back your reputation if Google, the company that many people trust, says you're not that good?
Yeah, I think it's the same as like reputation management effectively, because you've got to knock out what they're pulling from to overpower it and have your message be there instead. So, the first step would be look at it like a reputation management campaign where it's like, how do I, get more in that SERP and related SERPs where I'm like, top 3, top 10 or whatever, where it's my message that says I'm great. So that's like a combination of digital PR, because getting other sites to talk about you, other owned resources that you can create. And then what can you also do on like social media? So effectively you have your message in a variety of different places. And then when the search engine is trying to pull the right chunks related to your query, there will be more with your message in it. And then ultimately, when the language models are retrained, they're going to pull all that stuff as well. And so it's not necessarily something that's going to happen overnight, but it is something that you can do by starting with core optimizations to clean up what they're pulling from.
From my perspective as a content guy, I would see where the sources are for whatever is being output. Like if it said, for example, George isn't a very good editor, how dare it? I would say, who says that? Then I would hunt that person down and I'd find out, hey, on your website, you said I'm not a good editor. This is where this training data is being pulled from. What can I do to change your mind? Consider reaching out to the human. That was a bit aggressive. Sorry.
I'll hunt them down.
That was a bit aggressive.
Full Liam like Neeson, is it?
I barely have a set of skills. Okay. I want to return to some. Go ahead, Crystal.
Can I just say one last thing? If you see them say something accurate, or inaccurate, like factually inaccurate, like if it says, like if you say like what is Wix and it says they make pizzas, you can go thumbs down. Like all of these things, they all have a thumbs down, thumbs up thing, and you can give them human feedback. So that's reinforcement training. So that's something that they actively ask for in Google Gemini. It says, we want your feedback. On ChatGPT, on all of these things, they all have a thumbs up, thumbs down. If you see something factually inaccurate, give it the thumbs down and correct them, and with something and make sure that they can reference it somewhere. And I've seen that have good results, and definitely do that.
Okay, let's bring this back to SEO a little bit, something that we're all more familiar with. This is a great question. HubSpot is losing traffic. I'm not sure that that's the case at this particular moment. It might have leveled off, but still gaining revenue. Is this just because it's an established brand? So here we're talking about branding and what you really need to do, because your KPIs that you're normally dealing with SEO, like Mike said earlier, might not translate. And I'm going to put a resource written by Crystal in the chat as Mike answers this. But yeah, there you go. Is SEO worth it for less established businesses? Like the idea of what are your most valuable pages and what do you actually need to do? This is where your specific business meets the strategy. So Mike, what do you think?
So I think that search has always been a branding channel, but we always think of it as a performance channel. And I think people are going to start to realize this more based on all the latest changes where there's going to be less traffic coming. My point is that, let's say, for instance, you search for, I don't know, best sneakers for flat feet, and you get an AI overview that just lists them, and then it bolds, Under Armour's shoes or whatever. You may not click anything, but you may go to the store and buy that thing, and that's a good thing for that business. But when you look at it from a search perspective, you're like, oh, well, my traffic is going down. And so you're not thinking about the impact of being seen in these surfaces. So here's a closer to home example. Like, let's imagine you're a doctor of some sort, and someone is looking up, I don't know, let's say it's like a therapist, and they're looking for a therapist in Brooklyn or whatever, and you show up in the AI overview. User doesn't click through, but they call your number because they see it right there. That's still a valuable thing for you to be doing. So in answer to this question, it is still valuable irrespective of the size or how long your business has been around. It's just understanding what the impact will be to the business. If you just measure it based on traffic, you're going to be like, well, this channel isn't so great. But if you measure it by conversions and you see that conversions go up because there's more qualified traffic coming, well, then it makes a lot more sense for you to invest there. And if your phone rings more because you're appearing in search surfaces, then it's still valuable to you. But again, if you're just thinking about it from a traffic perspective, then yeah, you're probably better off investing in like a newsletter or social media or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's worth thinking about which channels your users are on. And also making sure that you're pulling through stuff. You're creating content that is close to your users, particularly if you're a small business. So I've worked with small businesses before where they wanted to boost their business, and so they redid the website, or they literally started a Facebook page. They didn't have one before. They started a Facebook page, and then they sent an email out to everybody who was on their email list who'd ever ordered from them, and then told them they had a Facebook page, and everybody showed up, and then they had a big boost to their what they were doing. They were really close to their customer base. I just shared a link in the discussion about user first topic research. If you are a very small business, you will get all the questions. They'll ask you, you'll post a video that's like, oh, look at these new bracelets that I have. And they'll say, oh, do you make them for wrists that are this size? Do you make them for kids? Do you make them for this? Do you make them for that? Take that and make that into a blog. Don't think too much about like big search volume things. Think about the niche questions that the people that you are serving have for you, and that will get you really, really far. And also you'll have much less competition because they will be specifically asking you about your specific thing, and you will be able to answer those things. It will only make your business richer as well as driving traffic.
Fantastic. We were at the top or the end of the hour, the bottom of the hour, I guess. Thank you all for staying this entire time. Mike, tell them about SEO Week one more time.
SEO Week, New York City. It's on my shirt.
Wait. Right, I was trying to push it to you. I was trying.
April 28th to May 1st, and we have a very special musical guest. I can't tell you right now, but follow me. I'm at iPullRank on all the things, and you'll find out.
All right.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
Take care. See you next month. Okay.